They were released into the sea with one clear purpose: to sow chaos and disorder in the North Atlantic. Among them were the two newest and fastest battleships of the German fleet, Scharnhorst and Genesos. These ships were rushing into battle, eager to confront the strongest opponents, hoping to demonstrate their power. Perhaps their target was a Royal Navy vessel, or even a powerful battleship. And that's why, when the ship spotters noticed something unusual, a sense of an impending battle immediately arose in the air. At that moment, everyone expected a fight to break out soon, as the lookouts shouted that an alien ship had been detected. Silence fell in the air, filled with anticipation and perhaps anxiety. But when the ship emerging from the November fog appeared on the horizon, everything turned out to be quite different from what was expected. It was not a warship at all, but not at all what they could have imagined. Its entire silhouette was too tall, too soft, more like a passenger liner. And indeed, it was a liner designed to carry people, not for war. Someone, however, had attached a few old 6-inch guns to its decks, which nevertheless made it look slightly more threatening than an ordinary passenger ship. It looked almost cute, if not for these armaments that gave it a somewhat grotesque appearance. Admiral Marshall, observing what was happening, could have easily destroyed this vessel with a single shot from his 18 11-inch guns. He had the most powerful artillery capable of crushing any ship in seconds. The music playing in his mind was a reminder of power and authority, but there was neither honor nor necessity for such an act. Such a deed would be cruel and inhumane. Instead, the German commander, watching the liner, turned on the spotlight and issued a merciful and approving order: drop to, or we shoot. The crew and observers, seeing this signal, anticipated the inevitable end: a white flag indicating surrender. They understood that the situation was about to spiral out of control, and that now either surrender would happen or a battle would begin. Tension hung in the air, as if on the verge of explosion. But instead of the expected surrender gesture, a bright orange flash suddenly lit up the bow of the liner. At that moment, it became clear that the situation could develop differently. A shell fired from the German ship flew past the bridge, causing no harm to the vessel, an act of defiance that was hard to explain. The liner, named HMS Rawalpindi, began its journey toward war. This ship had a long and interesting history. In the early days of its service, it was a luxurious passenger vessel, with long, smooth lines of the hull and spacious promenade decks where passengers could enjoy the sea breeze and beautiful views. It was launched in 1925 for the Peninsula and Oriental Steam Navigation Company. At that time, her displacement was about 16,697 tons. She operated on the route between Britain and India, carrying passengers and cargo, connecting two worlds. But everything changed in August 1939. The war required new solutions. The admiral, recognizing the importance of this vessel, requisitioned her and carried out urgent refitting. 8 old but still powerful 6-inch guns were installed on her unarmored hull, along with 2 3-inch anti-aircraft mounts. Thus, from a passenger liner, she was transformed into an armed merchant cruiser, which could be named after her spirit and purpose. The admiral needed to have enough ships at his disposal to control the sea and expand the enemy's blockade. This tactic not only limited the enemy's capabilities, but also forced enemy raiders to reveal themselves, making them vulnerable to detection. Such logic prompted Rawalpindi in October to head north to accomplish her assigned tasks. Her actions immediately proved effective. She stopped neutral ships for inspection to identify potential enemy vessels and reported the sinking of a German tanker discovered in the Danish Strait. However, despite the importance of her mission and usefulness, her detailed reports were ambivalent. They contained both vital information and potential dangers. For example, the signals she transmitted could be intercepted by German radio interceptors, which were already listening in. This meant that her messages could provide the enemy with valuable information about the ship's location and routes. Most of the crew aboard consisted of reservists. Merchant sailors, called up to perform combat duties, quickly turned into artillery crews. Stokers, who last participated in combat in 1918, were forced to relearn artillery firing skills. Young sailors, who had only undergone a month of specialized artillery training, tried to cope with the tasks assigned to them. In their free time between inspections of neutral ships, they chipped ice, repaired frozen mechanisms, and maintained morale by talking about loved ones and home. trying not to break under the harsh conditions. Evening hours brought brief comfort, hot cocoa, cigarettes, and quiet music playing in the wardroom, helping to relax and forget the hardships. Captain Kennedy led a calm, moderate life on board. He strictly adhered to the naval routine and dress code, even on the coldest days, to maintain discipline and order. He told his officers that it was precisely strict discipline that distinguished a combat ship from a mere floating target. In November, the conditions in the North Atlantic were terribly cold. The sea spray turned to ice on the rails, and the short daylight hours were replaced by long, foggy days that seemed to form walls around the ship. Through this mist, a liner painted in military colors slowly passed, creating the illusion that it was a peacetime vessel disguised as a warship. Valpindi, one of the ship's observation posts, patrolled its icy line, carefully monitoring the situation. A sailor standing nearby shifted position to change his vantage point. During that autumn, Duisland launched an attack, but due to technical malfunctions, she had to return to port for repairs. While Grabe was already freely roaming the South Atlantic to cover the retreat to the north and pose a threat to British trade, Berlin deployed the newest ships, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. These two vessels were similar, with a cargo capacity of about 26,000 tons and armed with 9 11-inch guns each. Their maximum speed exceeded 30 knots, making them very fast and dangerous opponents for any naval target. The actual displacement of these ships approached 32,100 tons standard, making them a formidable threat to the enemy. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder's orders were clear and specific. He demanded that these ships provoke a response from the British fleet, weaken the pressure on the pocket battleship Admiral Grabe, which was operating in the South Atlantic. During a successful naval expedition undertaken at a time when Germany still hoped to challenge Britain's naval power, it would seem that the German fleet could demonstrate its strength and resolve. This idea was well understood by the crew of the Charchors, who were aboard at that moment. They all clearly realized that their task was to test the new combat ship and their own endurance, to be prepared to face any dangers that the North Atlantic Ocean might present during those harsh winter months. Vice Admiral Wilhelm Marschall, who led the operation, set sail from Wilhelmshaven Island on November 21, 1939. But despite the surface ships, light cruisers and destroyer flotillas that disappeared from view during the storm, it was the heavy ships that remained in the shadows. Their presence was masked by the layer of oceanic depths and fog that thickened with the onset of evening. The original plan was to break through the strategic Icelandic Strait, creating a threat to the main shipping routes in the Atlantic and forcing the British fleet to concentrate its forces elsewhere. The Germans were well aware that the British patrol line was a delicate and vulnerable network, unevenly covered by defenses, and that weather conditions, as well as the speed of their ships, gave them a chance for quick strikes and rapid disappearance from detection zones. The third patrol, commanded by Captain Roel Pindy, was roughly where German tactics intersected with British patrol practices. This patrol line had already been engaged in October when it was discovered that the tanker Guggenheim had been sunk rather than captured, as previously assumed. This signal almost certainly reached the German Naval Command, allowing them to better understand the situation. It was also known that the British, in turn, stopped neutral ships to prevent infiltration into their waters. On November 23rd, the weather was typical for North Atlantic winter. The sun had almost set behind the horizon, coloring the sky in dark shades. Thick fog was rising on the port side, thickening in the harbor and creating a sense of complete isolation. In the distance, icebergs, large white cliffs like ghosts floating on cold water, passed by. As dusk fell, visibility would sometimes worsen and then slightly improve again, creating bands in which silhouettes could be discerned. The Northern Patrol had one main goal: to detect any German ship or submarine. But they also had a weakness that the Germans deliberately exploited. Although these cruisers were fast, they could not fight for long against battle cruisers and were vulnerable after a few minutes of combat. Their weak point was light armor and limited combat capabilities, making them susceptible when encountering heavier ships. Around 3:30 in the afternoon on November 23rd, southeast of Iceland, roughly between that island and the lighthouses, a signal was received from the observation post of the ship Royal Pendy. At that moment, two figures appeared on the horizon. These were masts and parts of superstructures. The sea was calm but very cold and icy. Fog hung over the port, obscuring visibility, and icebergs, large, white, ghostly, drifted past in the water. Captain Kennedy, taking his glasses, carefully studied the silhouettes, trying to understand what exactly he was seeing. At first, he thought it might be the German ship Deutschland, which he had heard about long ago and tried to avoid. But he was certain of one thing: it was necessary to act quickly. His crew received orders. The fog, like a moving wall, slowly enveloped everything around, creating the impression that nature itself had decided to play its game, hiding and confusing their paths. This dense gray curtain was not entirely deceptive, as it did not hide everything, but it still complicated understanding the situation and delayed the moment of decision. Kennedy, looking around, turned the ship toward the starboard side, intending to hide behind a massive iceberg located about 4 miles away. In such moments, under such faint lighting, even the largest liner could have used this massive piece of ice as a landmark, just as sailors long ago relied on natural objects for navigation and shelter. It took him only a few minutes to cover that distance and a few miles to reach a safe zone. However, on the horizon, where only fog and the open sea should have stretched, other, more dangerous ideas appeared. There, at the edge of visibility, moving silhouettes approached faster than any merchant ships typically traveling these waters. And this swift approach was heading straight toward them, cutting off their path to potential shelter and salvation. Suddenly, a bright point of light appeared on the horizon, flashing and pulsing like a warning beacon. It was a German searchlight with a clear inscription, "Heave to stop send," meaning immediately stop and send a signal. Soon, a warning shot rang out ahead, accompanied by alarm music, a sound that made the heart tighten in anticipation of trouble. A tall column of water, kicked up by an explosion, rose high into the sky. There was no doubt danger was approaching. Instantly, the men aboard the Royal Pindi realized that this was not just a random splash or illusion. They trembled at the thought that their ship, belonging to their allies, could be mistaken or threatened. Their hope for safe rescue instantly faded when the midshipman, the only one who had seen everything firsthand, recounted what he truly saw. And it was not just one threat, but two. Not only the German ship Deutschland, known for its power, but also a pair of modern battle cruisers, Charhorst and Gneisenau. These ships, like two hunters, now stood on either side of their vessel, surrounding it as predators encircle prey. Kennedy, standing on the bridge, realized that his ship was not one that could run or hide. It was doomed, and his main task was to do everything possible to protect his crew, save lives, and buy time for resistance. He understood that any order to surrender would be deadly, and he rejected it. He kept the transmitter on to send out a distress signal and began preparations, clearing the deck so nothing would hinder the crew's actions and getting ready for battle. His gaze met the chief engineer's eyes, and he spoke in a calm but very determined tone, almost foreign to his usual voice. "We will fight both of them. They will sink us, and that's all. Farewell." After that, he shook hands with the engineer, as if saying goodbye, and ordered the deck to be cleared for the upcoming actions. Although the German ships did not send a surrender signal, they patiently and deliberately waited, giving this vessel, already significantly outmatched, a chance to recover and surrender in order to save everyone on board. At that moment, faced with inevitable destruction, around 5:45 in the afternoon, the old 6-inch ship's pistol was brought to combat readiness. It fired at maximum range as a symbol, as a final act of resistance, for it was only a demon. Sparks, like bright flashes of fire, slowly approached the ship, and when one suddenly exploded against the metal hull of the Shanghor, a wave of powerful impact ran across the deck. It was like a roll of thunder that shook the entire deck and caused the officers to stop in bewilderment, exchanging puzzled glances. Anxiety and confusion were evident in their eyes. What was happening? Captain Hoffman, an experienced and calm man, hesitated, as if weighing each word before giving the order to open fire in response. Inside, he wrestled with conflicting feelings. On one hand, duty and the necessity to defend the ship. On the other, the understanding that destroying the enemy vessel might obliterate something more than just scrap metal. He thought of an ancient relic from peacetime, now on board, filled with reservists and civilians. those who were not involved in the war, who simply found themselves in danger. For some on the bridge, even the suggestion arose to cease fire, to give the British ship another chance to lower its flag, to show mercy in this brutal conflict. But these ideas were quickly dismissed. An Admiralty signal, transmitted via radio, ended the heated debate. There was no room for sentimentality in war, and this confrontation was supposed to be short and decisive. Everyone hoped. It was meant to serve as an example for other Allied ships, demonstrating that even in difficult moments, resolve must be maintained. The divide between the sides was obvious and striking. Both German ships were armed with 18 11-inch guns, an excessive armament, especially considering that a single such gun could pierce the unarmored hull of an old liner. The maximum firing range was about 4 miles, the limit for a battleship, requiring precision and skill to hit targets at such distance. The first German salvo was very powerful and delivered a destructive blow. Heavy shells thundered onto the boat deck and the control bridge. The radio station and wireless cabin were damaged, depriving the ship of the ability to send or receive signals. At that moment, Kennedy, one of the officers, experienced the first strong blow to the ship. Fire suddenly licked the decks and superstructure, causing chaos and panic. Electricity was cut off, and control of the ship was completely lost. Inside, frantic work began. Ammunition teams formed chains, manually transferring 6-inch shells from the magazines to the guns to continue firing despite the damage. Other officers and sailors worked to flood the compartments to prevent the spread of fire and explosions. Junior officers opened the valves to flood the holds, thereby reducing the risk of fire. 13 11-inch shells struck the liner among the ships, destroying the bridge, damaging the main radio room, and completely disabling the artillery control systems. At that moment, Chief Petty Officer Humphrey remained in place, directing local actions and ordering the remaining guns to fire independently of each other. What began as a signal to London quickly turned into a display of strong willpower. They continued firing despite the enemy's superiority in range and armament. This was important not only tactically, but also to keep the enemy at bay while the North Atlantic watched the events unfold. At this time, Ganoza approached from the other side and added her metal storm, intensifying the battle. Rawalpindi found itself under deadly crossfire. A group of 11-inch shells destroyed the main command post and the enemy's forward positions. The guns fell silent one after another, shattered. During those difficult days of naval battles, the men in the engine rooms and boiler rooms worked tirelessly until there was nothing left in those spaces that could be used. Workers, despite the danger and fatigue, continued to perform their duties, knowing that the fate of the entire ship depended on their efforts. The scene that unfolded at that moment was extremely bleak and alarming. Fiery death engulfed the entire liner. Flames, like a terrible living creature, flared brightly from bow to stern, engulfing the ship with incredible force. Inside and outside the vessel, shells continued to explode and flashes of light burst forth like lightning from the guns, seemingly trying to destroy the already wrecked ship. At the same time on the deck, the scenes appeared almost apocalyptic. Large gray figures, the crew and defenders of the ship, were tearing it apart, trying to slow the destruction, stop the fire, or prepare for evacuation. Under conditions of constant fire and explosions, to prevent the fire from spreading quickly and consuming the entire ship, it was necessary to throw overboard shells and cartridges filled with cordite, a highly explosive substance that could worsen the situation. These fragments and ammunition, posing a potential threat, had to be removed far away to avoid exacerbating the fire and causing new explosions. At this critical moment, the ship's commander, Captain Kennedy, moved across the decks, trying to coordinate all possible actions. In conditions where communication with command was completely broken or unavailable, and the number of personnel was insufficient to perform all tasks, he tried to manage what could be done. He even attempted to set up a smokescreen at the stern, a measure that could provide some concealment, hiding the ship from enemies or making it less visible to the opponent. Time was passing, and by 4 o'clock in the evening, the situation was becoming increasingly critical. Rawalpindi, one of the participants in this struggle, was completely halted. His vessel, or part of it, was burning along its entire length, spreading bright flames that illuminated everything around. Fortune turned away from the captain when he was near the aft deck, precisely where he was wounded by a shell explosion while organizing the evacuation of people. At that moment, despite all the panic and danger, orders to abandon the ship were being passed from mouth to mouth, people trying to maintain some semblance of organization amid the chaos. Afterwards, in the maritime area, magazines and documents issued their own announcements, reporting on the situation and giving orders. Soon, one of the shells, an 11-inch one, reached the forward hold, which had not yet been flooded. The explosion was powerful and destructive, splitting the ship into two parts, as if a giant sword had sliced through it. The wreckage and flames shot upward, tearing the sky apart and creating a spectacular display of destruction. From one of the guns, seemingly out of reflex, the last shot was fired. It soared into the air and fell silent, like a farewell sign. The battle lasted only about a quarter of an hour, from the first shot to the complete destruction of the ship. During this brief period, the main tactical effect was achieved. The ship was completely destroyed. Afterward, an operational report was sent with a message about what had happened. At sea, despite the destruction, two large German ships continued to hold their positions and fight back long enough to force the British forces to abandon their positions in a certain sector. That battle was almost equivalent to a slaughter. Tactically, it was a real bloodbath, where death and destruction went hand in hand. Strategically, this battle cost the Germans dearly. Although their losses were not reflected in the reports, he was a man whose duty and courage manifested in the most difficult moments of the battle. This man was a gunner who, despite being wounded, did not leave his injured brother and fought alongside him to save them both. In the brutal chaos, amid debris and ruins, he dragged his comrade toward the nearest boats, overcoming cold, flames, and dangers lurking at every step. The water, sticky and oily, as if trying to block their way, made every movement heavy and exhausting. His body began to give out, but he continued to fight, not losing hope and not forgetting about his brother. In the heat of the battle, he lost sight of him. In the whirlwind of chaos and fire, they were separated. Despite the loss, along with a few others, he reached a half-destroyed, partially flooded boat that seemed to be their last refuge. At that moment, the German ships spotted them and directed a bright beam of light toward them, a signal that was both a threat and a maneuver. In response, the Germans attempted to lure them closer by sending their signals and calls. The 3 oars they used to pull themselves toward the boat sliced through the darkness, while the stormy sea raged around them, threatening to sweep them away. At this moment, the reason Robert Pindy fought was rekindled in his heart, his will to live and his desire not to give up. The German ships registered a new contact, a signal indicating that their position had been discovered. At that moment, the British cruiser, whose name remained in the shadows, was rushing to the scene to provide assistance. Its call was answered by the HMS Newcastle, which had already begun firing at the German ships in the dark night. It shot at long range to distract the enemies and give others a chance to escape. Under these conditions, as in Shanghurst, the Germans, fearing encirclement and destruction, decided to halt the rescue operation and retreat. One of the Germans, showing coldness and calculation, warned the survivors waiting for rescue via radio. "Sorry, we can't stop. One of your ships is very close already. Good night and good luck." After this, powerful engines started working, and their ships quickly gained speed. Their wake nearly swallowed the remaining people in the water, whom they had been forced to leave behind. This brutal moment became a heavy test. The Germans faced a difficult choice: to preserve their honor or to save lives. Ultimately, the rescue operation, which had begun as an act of goodwill, gave way to the necessity of survival. The British fleet, as soon as the enemy retreated, hurried to the scene. Another ship, the Chautrol, which had wisely concealed itself under the cover of darkness, approached and discovered Lydbatter's boat with 10 people aboard. Additionally, other boats and vessels found and rescued the remaining survivors. In total, the British ships saved 11 people from the water. The Germans, retreating, further distanced themselves from pursuit and disappeared from view. According to early reports from the British press, the enemy managed to rescue between 25 and 30 people. Later sources indicated that 37 people were found and rescued on the German ships, including a Scottish artilleryman named Robert McBain, who spent the entire war in captivity. Of approximately 276 to 300 people aboard the Rawalpindi, about 238 perished along with the ship, while around 18 people managed to survive. The signals transmitted by the Rawalpindi set the fleet in motion. Initially believing that the contact was the German ship Deutschland, Admiral Forbes ordered the deployment of a wide-reaching network. The achievements he was able to accomplish in those difficult times were highlighted by one of the leading sailors, a man named Leadbatter. Subsequently, he explicitly stated that it was this very sacrifice of his that played a decisive role in repelling the attack of the raiders. His words sounded clear and sincere, resonating with many. Upon returning to his homeland, his heroism quickly became the subject of widespread public discussion. Over the course of several days, newspapers across the country published articles and reports about those who managed to escape and survive. In memory of his heroic act, 10 men dressed in hastily prepared and careless uniforms formed a parade formation of the cavalry guard to hear an important solemn speech. Standing before them was Admiral Sir Charles Little, who spoke about preserving naval traditions and the importance of remembering and honoring the past. These words were spoken in a ceremonial setting, and the people on the street greeted them with applause and cheers, without any prompts or cues. This took place at the end of November 1939, when the entire country was in a state of anticipation and tension. The strange war that was then ongoing on land seemed more like a prolonged wait for an impending blow, like a hammer ready to strike at any moment. At the same time, the naval battle felt very vivid and real, as if it could happen at any moment. During this period, a converted liner, standing still, reported contact with the enemy, opened fire first, and ultimately was destroyed, becoming a symbol of resolve and resilience. This ship became a symbol of the inner strength that was to lead Britain forward, even in the darkest days when the country faced its most grim hour. At that time, one naval officer named Kennedy did not receive the Victoria Cross, the highest award given for extraordinary bravery. This was due to changes in the award criteria that had occurred early in the war. Nevertheless, his heroic deed was not overlooked. It was mentioned in various musical reports and stories. The story of his heroism earned him further recognition, and his farewell on the ship's bridge became part of many memories and memoirs. It was a display of character rather than pride or boastfulness. In each such story, there was a quiet confidence of someone who had weighed all the odds, and despite everything, decided to fight anyway. The Royal Navy found meaning in these stories, and all of Britain shared their fate. A few weeks later, new orders were issued to strengthen patrols along the northern maritime borders, and the Air Force began additional surveillance around Iceland. In Germany, the incident was thoroughly investigated, and an official press release from the Kriegsmarine praised Kennedy's bravery, even celebrating his victory. In naval circles, there was a quiet but noticeable embarrassment regarding how much time it took for two modern battleships to silence a converted passenger liner, which was merely a target ship. However, in Britain, this event took on a different tone. Films, newsreels, and recruitment posters mentioned the name of Rawalpindi as proof that the spirit of the old Navy still lived on. The remnants of the ship, named HMS Rawalpindi, rest on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean at coordinates 63 degrees, 40 minutes north latitude, and 12 degrees 31 minutes west longitude. These deep waters are considered a war grave, where 238 people, including the captain, perished along with the ship. The attack on the vessel immediately elicited a response from public opinion in Britain, a country that, at the time, was eager for heroes to boost morale and strengthen the spirit. The sinking of the AMC ship cost them dearly. It not only wasted valuable time, but also deprived them of the element of surprise, which is so crucial in combat. As a result of this unexpected blow, plans had to be urgently changed and scheduled operations canceled. Admiral Marshall was forced to abandon the planned raid into the Atlantic to avoid confrontation with the superior forces of the British fleet, which was fully focused at that moment on seizing and controlling maritime communications. His ships were compelled to return to Germany under threat of attack from the entire British mainland, which had already concentrated its forces to fight them. This event became an important lesson, demonstrating that the initial plans to reduce pressure on the ship Admiral Grabe, the main target, had completely failed. The failure to accomplish this task meant that the enemy was able to maintain its superiority and continue applying pressure. After this incident, the command was forced to reconsider its strategy and assess how vulnerable armed merchant cruisers truly were. Their role in combat proved to be less reliable than initially assumed. New orders were issued stating that these ships should perform a completely different role, to become scouts rather than combat units. Their primary function was to detect the enemy, gather vital intelligence, and quickly retreat without engaging in direct confrontation. The whole idea was for these vessels to act more as reconnaissance ships rather than combat ships capable of engaging in prolonged battles. This was necessary to minimize losses and ensure the safety of more important vessels. To prevent a repeat of such tragedies and reduce the risks associated with ship vulnerability, measures were soon taken to strengthen the Northern Patrol. It was reinforced with heavy cruisers, powerful and well-protected warships capable of resisting enemy attacks. Additionally, air patrols from the Orkney Islands, a strategic base located off the northern coast, were significantly expanded. These measures were intended to provide more reliable protection and control over vital sea routes, as well as to increase the chances of timely detection and countering potential threats. The stand at Rawalpindi became the first important chapter in the ongoing and arduous struggle for control over the North Atlantic. This battle became a symbol of the fight between forces trying to preserve their trade routes and an enemy striving to cut off those routes. Maritime sailors participated in this struggle, escort ships and converted liners that became the last line of defense. These ships served as a shield between Britain and the threat of famine caused by the blockade. They risked everything to ensure supplies and maintain communication with the mainland. This fight continued for many years, turning into a symbol of resilience and courage. Lewis, the son of President Kennedy, was not only a naval officer who served on destroyers during the war, but also later became a well-known figure in society. He contributed to public life as an acclaimed writer and television host. In his memoirs, he often revisited the story of Rawalpindi, a significant event in maritime warfare. In his reflections, he pondered the harsh duty that led his father to a decision that was both heroic and, in the author's view, excessively risky from a military standpoint. Louis detailed how this decision affected the fate of the ships and their crews, sharing his thoughts on how such decisions are made under pressure, when every step can be decisive for victory or defeat.